All right, a good Erev Shabbos and a good Erev Yontiv. Oy vey. I feel a burden that I want to talk about this subject while I really don't want to talk about it. I feel like this has been placed in front of me and that I have no choice, even though I'm probably bringing attention to something that a lot of people, a lot of my viewers might not be aware of, but it's most likely if I'm aware of this, then you are as well. I just, over the yesterday and today, took the time to listen to a YouTube video. It was two men talking. I'm not going to get too much involved with who it was. On this, and both of them would generally be labeled as anti-Semitic, and they've had their they've been deplatformed on many platforms because of their because of the discussions that they've had either individually or between one and another. And I often say, if you watch my channel, you hear me say this, I am concerned with Judeophobia and not anti-Semitism, because to me Judaism is my religion. It's not necessarily my race, although I have Jewish ancestry. I'm born Jewish according to Halacha. My mother is Jewish, and her parents were Jewish, and so and while I do have that yichus, going back to on my Zayda's side to very Choshever Abonim, to Krulerov, to Chengarov, to the Verdanarov, to Temeshvarov, and going back further to the Heilige Chavis Yoyer and the Maharal Maprag, Schusim Yidin Leno, and we have some indication maybe also from the Shloah Kodesh, but we couldn't find exactly which of the children of the Shloah Kodesh, but it's recorded also that we were from the Shloah Kodesh, which the Shloah Kodesh had a lot of children, and he had a lot of Einiklach. So it's a very common thing to be an Einikl from Shloah Kodesh. I remember there was one friend of mine from Facebook. He married a Rebbe Shekind. He married a granddaughter of a Chassidish Rebbe, and this younger man, he's a Ger Tzedek. And he mentioned something was the yard site from the Shloah Kodesh, and he said, "Oh, his wife is an Einikl from Shloah Kodesh." I said, "Most likely you're also an Einikl from Shloah Kodesh because he had so many children, it's just so many Einikl." Kanai Nahara. So even though he was a Ger Tzedek, he wasn't born Jewish, he converted to Judaism, he probably, somewhere in his ancestry, I wouldn't be surprised, it would be a mathematical likeliness that, he was from a Western European country, I don't remember if it's the Netherlands or... but anyway, but I told him that, I said, Mr. you're also Einikl from the Shloah Kodesh, because there's so many children. And the truth is, Maharal Maprag also has a lot of Einiklach. But personally, I feel a very strong kesher to the Chavis Yoyer, and I like to learn his Sfarim. But anyway, that's not really the point that I'm bringing up here, because it's just the opposite, like what I'm saying, is that to me Judaism is a religion and not a race. And the Ger Tzedek is just as Jewish as any born Jew, and in a way maybe even more so, which we could discuss maybe another time. The story with Rabbi Leff, where he told a child of a Giores, he said that the kids were picking on this boy because his mother is a Giores, and he said, no, it's just the opposite. He said, someone comes in and says they're Jewish, it's a chazaka, maybe they are, maybe they're not, how do we really know? But I know you're Jewish because I was there. I was there when it happened, when your mother became Jewish. So if that's your mother, then you're Jewish. I know that. I know that as a fact. See, he felt proud of that, and he said, and it's true, he wasn't embellishing anything. He's telling the absolute truth. And so in that way, we could say that the convert is more Jewish than the born Jew, in a certain way. And so that's why I say I'm not concerned with anti-Semitism, because you don't change your race by changing your religion. I'm concerned with Judeophobia, and part of that is also because I really don't care about race. I think the obsession with race does not belong in our day and age. And I believe that, indeed, and I can prove this, that, and I've made videos on this subject, that the rabbis of the Talmud sought to stamp out racism, even racism that exists in the Torah. Meaning, racism that was a mitzvah. Like, and I don't mean that necessarily racism in a negative sense, but recognition of various races. When you had the Torah tells us a mitzvah, it's a specific commandment of that the Moabites and the Ammonites, they're allowed to convert, but if they convert, they cannot marry into the born Jewish community. Halachically speaking, we have the term of mutar lavei b'kahol or asur lavei b'kahol. They're allowed to enter the congregation or prohibited from entering the congregation. And so these nations, these two nations, the Ammonites and the Moabites, were prohibited from entering into the congregation. They can convert and keep mitzvahs, but not, and they can marry other converts, but they cannot marry a born Jew, even to the 10th generation, it says, right? So you might assume, you might be worried anybody could be from this ancestry, particularly by this time in history, and yet we're not worried about that. And generally it's understood that 10th generation means forever. It's just it's just a symbolic number, but it really means forever. But the truth is, no, just the opposite. The rabbis teach us that because Sennacherib, which is how we pronounce it, was Mevalbul the Umas, because he relocated the Assyrians, they relocated various nations and exiled them. We don't know who is a Moabite and Ammonite, and we're not worried because there's a halachic, there's a legal rule, kol haparish meruba parish. Any fraction that's removed from a greater whole, you can assume is removed from the majority of that greater whole. And since Moabites and Ammonites are a minority in the world in general, as would be any individual nation of the 70 nations, any one of them would be the minority. When someone arrives and we don't know if they're a Moabite or not, we assume they're not, and even if they come from the land of Moab, it doesn't matter, because the people were moved and we don't know where they're moved to, and so the law of the Moabite and Ammonite, etc., does not exist. The same the Edomite and the Egyptian and so forth, these other nations that also had less restrictive laws, but nonetheless they had laws applied to them. They don't exist anymore, these nations. And so the Torah thereby, by our rabbinical tradition, by our oral traditions, is more welcoming and eliminates this racial component and allows any nation could be mutar lavai b'kahal. And so I think, and from a Torah perspective, that racism is stupid. And this obsession with race, which works both ways. The same thing could be said about racial justice and so forth. In a historical sense that's applied, unless there can be a clear... I do believe there might be some place for what's often referred to as racial justice, but not to the extent that's generally understood of reparations and so forth. But in the sense of how Donald Trump is approaching things with opportunity zones, with the with the money for the historically black colleges and so forth, because there's a recognition of the disadvantage. There's a recognition, in a certain small sense, of, I don't think the term white privilege is appropriate. I think that's a little bit of a myth, but more in the sense of that the society did place a disadvantage racially upon certain people, and who was it who fixed the playing field? Who was it who is engaging in authentic racial justice instead of just lip service to racial justice? That's been our great president, Donald J. Trump. He has done that, and in a way that's appropriate and is fair, by just giving everybody, not giving an extra advantage now necessarily to people of color, but and not with the racist and segregationist ideology of the left. It's no shock to me, but a lot of people will be surprised that how segregationism is not only a historical aspect of the Democratic Party, but it's the current view of the American left. In colleges, I think it was the University of Michigan, I'm not sure which one it was, I saw this on Twitter. They had two cafes and said, this is only for people of color and this is only for non-people of color. And this is what the left is imposing upon the students and allowing among the students, not the American right, which is different than the European right. As I've said before, the European right is essentially a variation of the left. They're still for a big government. They're still for identity politics. They agree, for the most part, with the left because the left are the racists. But with all that being said, I've said time and time again that I'm not concerned with anti-Semitism. I'm concerned with Judeophobia. I am not concerned with if someone criticizes George Soros, I criticize him. I more than criticize him. I think he should be prosecuted for his many crimes that he's done against humanity. And I don't think there's any conspiracy theories here. This is proven facts about this man. Even though certain things have been said that people might say are conspiracy theories, but there's enough clear facts that so let's forget about the conspiracy theories. Let's talk about the facts. When it comes to things like the conspiracies about the Rothschild bankers, I don't know enough about this subject to comment on it. But if it's indeed true, the types of things that people accuse the Rothschild bankers of, that's not everyone with the last name Rothschild, Michael Rothschild is a very choshev person. doing wonderful things, the Chofetz Chaim Heritage Foundation. I don't mean anybody with the name Rothschild, but the all the conspiracy theories about them, I don't think, certainly most of them are not true. Maybe some of them are, some of them aren't. I really don't know. But the issue that people have with these groups, with these people, it's not anti-Semitic, and so too, I've said also, a lot of people accuse a group QAnon of being anti-Semitic, and I don't get it. I don't understand why people are fighting a group that is fighting against child abuse and is encouraging unity among all races and religions. And then they say this is an anti-Semitic group because they say it takes on certain anti-Semitic tropes. Again, I'm not sure that the claims that they make are true or not. Some of them are kind of convincing. But with that being said, if it was true, you can't get away with hiding behind some kind of a Jewish identity and then going and saying that that you're anti-Semitic for bringing this up. No, it's just the opposite. With all that being said, I came across something that was a little bit more difficult for me to deal with. And that was a discussion, like I said, between two men. One was older, one was younger. And they were discussing Judaism. They were discussing Kabbalah and the Talmud, and they made claims that, again, most people would say snap judgment, this is anti-Semitic, and the truth is it's Judeophobic, or Torahphobic, and it's entirely Judeophobic, Torahphobic. Meaning, this discussion that these two men had, although they didn't say it as clearly, but if you're listening to what they're saying, that's the conclusion that you're going to get to, is that these two men hate Christianity and Islam as well as being Jewish based, which they are. And they making claims about the main thing they're talking about was what they was discussing Jewish supremacy. The scariest part about, and the most difficult issue dealing with this, was that 99% of what they were saying was quoted properly and not taken out of context, although sometimes they might pronounce things wrong. Quite often they're going to mispronounce Jewish concepts, but they're not forging or falsifying anything. They were quoting actual quotes from the Talmud, from the Kabbalah, but they were interpreting it in a certain way. And I think this is, and there are a few things you could argue that's intellectually dishonest, one way or the other. Although the truth was that what they said was the average Jewish person doesn't know about any of this. They only mentioned that briefly, though. Which again, to a certain extent, could be true. But it's a very, very difficult story to discuss, because it's hard to refute so much of what they said is quoted accurately. It's not how so many missionaries and anti-Semites and so forth, or Judeophobes, misquote our texts, take them out of context, etc., etc. Here, it was, for the most part, in context. It was not certain things that they said were not that I would disagree with. Certainly, how they presented it were not presented maliciously or with any judgment. I don't know what ideology these men are coming from. Oh, I gotta go.